Well, finally, the requalifiers are finished. You're watching the World Cup Mood Board on 99.94. Zimbabwe were suspended for the last World Cup due to political interference, which is weird because they had that for a long time. But anyway, it cost them more than just the last World Cup, but also cost them a ton of money. Blessing Muzarambani was a Kolpak player who almost ended up playing Major League Cricket in the US. Their best cricketer of the last 15 years has been Gary Ballance, who was off playing in England. They also had Colin de Grandhomme, who was pretty good as well. Zimbabwe cricket was so broke for a little while there that they couldn't really attract any sponsors or any money at all, that Ryan Burl, their leg spinning all-rounder, took to Twitter to say, can someone please give me some better cricket boots? Two former heroes, Brendan Taylor and then Heath Streak, both fell on hard times, got involved with match fixing, kind of like one after the other. And for the 2019 World Cup, Zimbabwe didn't qualify for that. That's not everything. That's just like a selection of a few of the things that happened to Zimbabwean cricket over that time. It's been rough. It's been really rough for them for a long time. And this is a nation who knows about ugly times in cricket. And even so, the last few years have been about as grim as it can be. And yet, after all that, they just qualified for the main part of this World Cup. In fact, 2016 was the last time in this World Cup, and they qualified for it then as well. I mean, if that doesn't warm your heart, then let me add this bit. You may have seen all the Zimbabwean fans at the ground. Many of them came from Hobart themselves, but a lot came from Townsville and Perth and even New Zealand to come and support their side. Only, as Bharat has said, and he actually said this on the last Uncovered podcast, that a lot of those fans are actually not cricket fans. They're just Zimbabweans who happen to live in Australia and New Zealand and thought this was a perfect chance for them to go and support their nation more so than their team, because it's not really their team. But they're living abroad, and this is their chance to support the side that represents their nation probably in the most public way possible. And you could see what that meant to the players involved, and especially the support that they felt from that. And that's an important word in Zimbabwe cricket these days, because they've been through a lot and they needed this. They needed the fans. They needed the success. They needed this World Cup more than probably most other teams did. And I hope they surprise a team or two in the next round and have some fun with it. But even if they don't, I hope the entire cricket consciousness of Zimbabwe remembers this feeling for a very, very long time. And I just want to shout out two people involved with Zimbabwean cricket. One is Secunda Raza, and we'll get to his tournament in a moment. But his performance and attitude for quite a long time has been very, very good within Zimbabwean cricket. And he's just become this totem of their success. And as he's got better, the team has got better. The other one is Dave Houghton, who's the new coach. I think he started coaching in June or July for the Zimbabwean team. And you might think, well, that's not a lot of time to have a big impact. That's not how they're talking within and around the team. They're talking that he has had a lot of impact. There's been a lot of talk recently about how he's got this baseball type inspired theory that he's been bringing across to the Zimbabwean cricketers. And I'm not sure if I really believe that. But one thing I do know is that Dave Houghton coached this team in the late 90s, and his life would be fundamentally easier if he didn't coach them now. He's made the decision to go back again and try and help Zimbabwean cricket, and he has very much done that. So I don't know if it's baseball inspired or whatever else it is, but I am loving this new Zimball cricket that we have seen at this tournament. Let's just go through a couple of their players, as I think there's quite a few stories here. Although he wasn't quite able to see them home, Sean Irvine found a situation that was perfectly suiting his particular set of skills to go Liam Neeson on you, or on him, I suppose. Zimbabwe only needed just over 6.5 runs and over, and Irvine's fairly pedestrian strike rate in international cricket of 107 is kind of not going to be an issue in that situation. However, it just So that just allowed him to just kind of slowly grind Scotland out of the game, out of the tournament, I suppose you would say. And Zimbabwe could have panicked when Scotland had them 7-2 inside the first 2 overs, but Irvine used all of his experience to ensure that they didn't collapse. He's a proper player. We've seen him for a very long time. He's been playing cricket for Zimbabwe for, ever at this point, right? And remember that they did actually collapse under some pressure against the West Indies in the previous game. And it's worth remembering that he was sick in that game and didn't play. So he certainly made their batting less brittle. And it wasn't just his batting that got Zimbabwe the win, though. Obviously, Mukunda Raza just came in and, his great year just keeps improving. He's now the leading run scorer in the tournament, thanks to his 40 from 23 balls. And he's very much the yin to Irvine's slow scoring yang, striking 174. And he's the only man on either side to hit a 6 in that game, which tells you that the pitch wasn't particularly set up for fast scoring. And he allowed for the Irvine to play his natural game as well. Well, it was absolutely brilliant. It's clear that Zimbabwe's batting is really reliant on Raza, and how that holds up in the next part of the tournament is going to be the trickiest thing. But as it currently stands, he is holding up. So hopefully he can continue to do that. We talked about the batters. This win was set up by the bowlers, though. And I think coming into this tournament, we knew that Zimbabwean bowlers were their strength, their flexibility, a little bit of all-round skill that they have, and the new bowlers. And that's who I want to focus on a little bit here. So Tende Chatara is not just a man with a bit of a weird bowling action, although it does look like he loses his front arm completely and almost bowls just with his right arm. But, he has a good record in all forms of international cricket. And I think if it was a better period for the Zimbabwean team over the last 4 or 5 years, he would have got a lot more respect. But as it is, we don't tend to talk about him that much. And obviously, with Blessing coming in, he gets all the attention because he's 9 foot tall. But this was an incredibly important game for Zimbabwean cricket. And Chatara started with the wicket of Jones. His following over was actually a maiden. And he came back on for the 13th over and went for only 3 runs. And then he had to bowl the last over of the innings when Scotland were desperate for any runs that they could get. And he allowed only 6 more. It's just a fantastic bowling effort from him. And to be honest, all 3 of their seamers have been terrific in this tournament so far. It was just Chatara's day today. That made more sense before I read it out loud. Let's go on to the Ireland win now. Let's go with the teams going through to the next round. And Ireland were completely embarrassed in the last World Cup. They won their first game, and they were terrible in the 2 that followed. And then they had a must-win match against Namibia, and their batters looked timid and afraid. In fact, here is Andy Balboni talking about it on the Red Inker on 99.94 podcast a few months back.
That was really slow and tired. It was the sort of wicket where, you go 6 or 7 and over and then go hard at the end. Just make sure that the scoreboard was ticking. But we went through a phase, and that's when I was out there, where the scoreboard just looked like it wasn't moving. And that's a hard place to be in, especially in such a big game like that. You do feel the kind of extra pressure. But in saying that, we got to a total that after the power play with the ball, we thought that we were really in the game. There was a huge DRS decision we didn't go for. It was all happening because Mark had got injured as the ball. I was at mid wicket, and I was like, that looks very adjacent. But I had 2 or 3 lads were just saying, "Oh, he's hit it."
So that was a really bad game for Irish cricket. They were playing Namibia. They're a test playing nation. They struggled in that particular game, and it didn't go anywhere near the way that they wanted it to. And this is how he felt after this game. And you can see it's a little bit different.
Assessment of that game?
Yeah, obviously a lot better than it was this time 12 months ago. And yeah, there's a lot of emotion because we've had a long 12 months of trying to find out how we want to play this game. And it's worked sometimes, it hasn't worked other times. But to kind of pull out 2 performances like we have against Scotland and today against West Indies when it really counts, Certainly as a kind of senior player and a captain, I'm very proud of the way everyone's kind of gone about it.
And no doubt that was our best performance in the T20 international.
I think so. I think it was pretty complete. Lorcan as well, who's obviously in this room, so I'll give him a couple of compliments.
You can see there we did a slow motion of his smile. Look, he doesn't smile a lot, and there's absolutely no doubt that he is not a demonstrably happy, smiley person. Although, having said that, he certainly. Well, there we go. We got the freeze frame of. It's kind of like it's not even a Mona Lisa smile, is it? It's something else. Although feel free to paint it if you get the mood for it. He's not going to be the sort of person who's going to be like Ganguly or Warne on the Lord's balcony. Although there is a picture of him on the Lord's balcony there, dressed as Ganguly, undressed as Ganguly, I suppose, in this particular case. I think we need to put it in context. Ireland is a test-playing nation. And not only that, they beat the West Indies in ODI series in the Caribbean, not that long ago. But let's not downplay this. Even when accounting for the fact that the West Indies played like a busted ass, this is huge for Ireland because they dominated this game. They're in front from the third over of the game until the ICC were booking the West Indies on new flights home. And I don't think they've been as good in T20 cricket as we've certainly seen them in one-day cricket. They didn't really resemble the team that lost to Zimbabwe, or, to be honest, had been pretty ordinary at T20 cricket for quite some time now. And you can include the last match as well. Ireland were packing their... I mean, think about that. Ireland were packing their bags and stealing the robe from their hotel room when Scotland took their fourth wicket. And Camphor and Dockrell smashed their way back into the game. And... today, the top order just sort of took that and continued to go with it. In terms of what happened last time and who their opposition was, and that this was their second straight knockout match, you can make a pretty solid argument that this is Ireland's greatest T20 victory kind of ever, as Balbirnie did himself. Just on Balbirnie and Sterling as batters, because I think it is worth talking about them. Ireland broke this chase very early on. They snapped it in two, essentially. After 3 overs, they were 31 for no loss, and both players had hit some boundaries. But it was really that fourth over where things went completely nuts. Odean Smith was brought on, and Balbirnie basically cashed in on a poor ball down the leg side. Next one, he picked up a ball and helped it on its way over fine leg. And then he guided another ball to the offside boundary just after that. In those 3 balls, Balbirnie basically made the game run a ball from then on in. And the next over, he launched Obed McCoy over covers for 6 as well. And the game was kind of really done. And the real Balbirnie turned up. It had actually been a while since we'd seen that player. His last innings like this was 10 games ago when he smashed India around Malahide. Since then, he's been struggling a little bit. Even when he's made runs, it's been quite slow. When he gets in this kind of mood like he was against the West Indies today, it does feel like he's almost impenetrable. It feels like the ball wants to find the middle of the bat, like a right-handed, more classical version of Yuvraj Singh, right? Where it doesn't make sense how hard he's hitting the ball and how quickly it is disappearing. It's ridiculous to watch him in that kind of form. And yet, as good as he was, it was the other guy, Sterling, that really helped him. We had talked about how their top order wasn't performing and didn't look like it was about to come good. And Sterling is the undisputed star of this Ireland side. He's an established presence in kind of almost every T20 league in the world at this point. Sometimes, he's the only... It's like the old Dwayne Bravo joke where Paul Sterling is seemingly playing in 2 T20 leagues at the same time. He came into this match on a fairly miserable run of form, with just one score that made it to double figures in his last 8 competitive knocks, including a duck and an 8 early in this tournament. But he found a great way to rediscover his touch. He had 22 of the first 31 runs. So when I talked about that very quick start, a lot of that was Sterling. And he was, and he had single-handedly double what the West Indies had managed at the same stage as well. But it wasn't that sort of Sterling mindless slapping that he does, which he's brilliant at, by the way. I thought he batted really cleverly all the way through here. A lot of his runs came from behind the wicket, and generally he was playing against the West Indies fielding plan rather than just backing his own strengths, paddling the ball, all those sorts of things. And Ireland also were using the lopsided dimensions of the ground to their advantage, and that sometimes happens in Bell Reeve. And I thought they were much smarter with the way they did it, and that was in the field, but also with Sterling himself. And clearly, when Ireland have Sterling playing like this, they're a completely different side. We just talked about Zimbabwe as well. You have players like Sterling or Raza having great tournaments, and it's a huge difference. Sometimes we think the whole team is playing bad, but it's just that one or two major stars who can make the difference aren't playing. But we've talked about their captain and their main star. Gareth Delaney also had a game. It was his career best figures, 4 overs, 3 for 16, 12 dot balls in those, which were quite important as well. Ireland, as a team, bowled very cleverly. Again, as I said before, they were using the space of the ground or the weird dimensions of the ground. They forced the West Indies to hit to the longer side, and Delaney was particularly brilliant, I think, in that role. He got rid of Evan Lewis and Nicholas Pooran with his wrong-uns, and he returned later with a spell and forced Rodman Powell to try and hit to the larger side of the ground. And he was gone as well. So that was a big blow at a time where West Indies still could have kicked on a little bit, and it basically stopped them from cutting loose. And they ended up with 146, which we now know is well below par. And Delaney bowled very, very cleverly in order to help with that. And he's not a massive frontline bowler by any stretch. So for him to have a day like that was absolutely huge. So there's a lot of good stories out of Ireland cricket. There's not as many out of the West Indies, though. And let's start with Michelle from West Indies on 99.94, because unsurprisingly, he's got some things to say.
Out of the 2022 T20 World Cup in the first round. And to be fair, if you're a true student of West Indies cricket, you can't be surprised. You really can't. The signs were coming before this World Cup. Dre Russ was kicking off with the board. Sunil Narine was saying he was interested, then he wasn't interested. Hetmeyer missed a flight. We picked Yannick Correa completely out of the blue. But more importantly than all that, we picked a team and a set of batters that just couldn't adapt to the conditions and dimensions of the grounds in Hobart. Am I upset we're out? No. Why? It was expected.
So I asked Mash to make that video, and I wasn't sure what I was going to get back. I didn't know if I was going to get angry or, upset. We got very strong, disappointed dad vibes from that, right? It's not just me. On the West Indies, it wasn't surprising. I'd been on the record as saying I wasn't sure that the West Indies would qualify. This was just a tough group as well. That's not forgiving the West Indies, but it was a much more tough group. There was no outstanding team, but there was also no ordinary ones, which meant that kind of everyone had to go, which is why it was so close coming into this last day. So winning twice was always going to be tough, as it certainly proved for Scotland, even though they were in the games. West Indies maybe shouldn't have proved as tough, but here we are. And this is bad, right? This is T20 cricket, not ODI cricket, where the West Indies haven't been really any good for a generation. However, I wonder if this also might not have some silver linings to it. The great thing about the re-qualifiers is that the teams do have to qualify for the tournament. It's very annoying for teams like, Netherlands and Ireland, who have already been through a round of qualifying, to have to do it again. But the West Indies haven't. They were just dropped into this tournament and then bounced out easily. If they had just dropped into the main part of this tournament and bounced out easily like they had last time, I don't think there would be the same sort of reaction that we're going to see with West Indies cricket coming up. This is huge, not to make the main part of the tournament, to have Zimbabwe, who were suspended for the last tournament, to have Scotland, who are not a test playing nation, beat them, to have Ireland beat them in a second World Cup. I want to say down under. Does New Zealand count as down under? But you know what I mean. 2 World Cups now, Ireland have managed to beat them when they played in Australia and New Zealand. It's getting to the point, right, where it's not. It's getting really clear that there is something obviously wrong when it comes to what has happened here. Here's a tweet just from the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, so probably from Michelle or Santoki, talking about what was going on. Shimron Hetmeyer was playing club cricket in Guyana during this tournament, and Saddam Narayan was playing practice matches of 50-over cricket, which he doesn't even, I'm not even sure why. I don't know what Andre Russell is doing as well. So talent is not a problem. Ensuring that these players are on the field for the World Cup clearly is becoming an issue for West Indies, and it's not a new issue, is it? The difference is before that there was enough talent to be able to hold them over in some of those situations. I'm not sure that talent has developed enough. Players like Odean Smith and Nicholas Pooran and Obed McCoy, there's a lot of talent there, but they're not bang on pros just at the moment who are going to smash the opposition teams. So it wasn't that Shimron Hetmeyer was saying no to go and play millions, make millions of dollars in the IPL or some other league, right? He's literally playing club cricket in Guyana. That's a huge problem with cricket in the West Indies at the moment. And, that's why they're not in the World Cup at the moment. Scotland. So let's go on to them. They had a great chance to beat Ireland. I mean, more than that. That's underselling it a little bit, isn't it? You expect teams to win about, 90% of the time from the position that Scotland were in. And they ran into one of those Curtis Camphor days that happen. This game wasn't quite the same. Clearly, they hadn't made enough runs, but they did have Zimbabwe 7 for 2 and then 42 for 3, right? Consider they beat the West Indies, and they're going to end up with being 1 win and 2 losses, and having those 2 positions available to them. I think this is going to haunt them for a little while. And against Ireland, the problem was not being able to react quick enough to the Camphor and Dockrell partnership. Here it was that they just didn't make enough runs. In this tournament, George Munsey made 250s, which is obviously excellent. And if you had said that a few years back, you would have expected them to be off 30 balls, maybe off 20 balls. At that stage, he was smashing the ball everywhere in T20 cricket. In this tournament, that wasn't happening for him. He made runs, but they were slow. And he spent both knocks as frustrated as you could be making a 50 in a World Cup. And if you look at his strike rate over the last 3 years, it's bad. And it's bad for kind of anyone. Literally, really bad for someone like him who, look at his good years. We're talking about a guy who's around 150, even above. He's been, a fantastic hitter of the ball, and suddenly he's not being able to do that as well. But to lay this at his feet would be unfair. If you go through the strike rates over here of the Scottish scorecard, there was a lot of players who really struggled to score quick enough in this particular game. And perhaps the pitch was slightly trickier than we thought, and maybe Ireland made it look better. I don't know, but Ireland batted just before Scotland did. But there's a few concerning issues, I think, with Scotland at the moment. And it's not just, it's not just that George Munsey is slowed down. I think a lot of their players have struggled to either replicate the runs that they were making before, or they've lost Kyle Kutzer, which hasn't happened. And they're not getting the explosiveness that really made them one of the, it's how they dominated T20 cricket in the associate level. And it seems to have just fallen away a little bit at the moment. But if you really look at the last 2 games, their bowlers didn't perform when they needed them against Ireland, and then their batters didn't perform when they needed them against Zimbabwe. Had they combined either of those 2 games, they're going through to the next round. They would still have these problems, but they'd be in the second round. If second round problems are much better than first round problems. No one wants first round problems. I think Scotland played good enough cricket in total to get through to that main part of the tournament. So that is going to hurt them, knowing that they're going home early, especially after they went through the second round last time. Max O'Dowd, just a clarification, in fact, from Max O'Dowd himself on our last video. I said that his Dutch passport came from his mother, which is, I suppose, technically true. But he pointed out that he also lived in the Netherlands between the ages of 6 and 12. And he played age group cricket there. I mean, I've got a pretty good database, but I don't have access to under 12 cricket in Netherlands. I would love to, but it probably might be beyond my skills. But as an apology to Mr. O'Dowd, here's another picture of him as Thor, which I think is a lovely thing to do. All right, on to Sean Masood. They were only having net practice today, but Pakistan had an injury scare when he was hit in the head by a cricket ball. From what I've heard, or you can see the photo there, there's a lot of concern when he was hit. So obviously it was a very bad hit. He wasn't he wasn't batting at the time. And so there was a stray shot that hit him in the head. That's what Charlie's reported. I thought he was hit by a bouncer, but maybe Charlie's probably done more research than me, so I'll back him on that one. There was a lot of concern at the time, as I said, but he hasn't shown any signs of concussion. He was, however, taken to hospital for some precautionary scans, and the man himself has informed us and the mood board that he's fine and that they are just for precautionary reasons. So we're hoping that he's fine. If he doesn't have any concussion symptoms, and don't forget these things can come up later, not just at the time. If he doesn't have any of those symptoms, he'll be available to play whenever Pakistan need him. Of course, if he doesn't, he might have a week off cricket. So hoping that that freak accident isn't going to cause him to miss any games with Pakistan. Of course, it could be worse, Sean. You could have been playing golf. And now on to something completely different and slightly away from the World Cup. But someone who you probably don't know passed away in the middle of this World Cup just last night. Travis Basevi was one of the people who built Cricinfo. He actually had two parts of his career with Cricinfo, or two big events, sorry, I should say, with Cricinfo. The first was him collating, uploading, making scorecards look pretty. So if you've ever looked at an old scorecard on Cricinfo looking for a test match, chances are Travis had something to do with that. But then he went on to do something far more important, or far more earth-shattering, I think, within cricket, is that he actually invented Stats Guru. And you know it as that thing that you use to win fights with your friend and embarrass your drunk uncles. But Travis came up with that idea on a train in India using his notepad in, I think it was the late 90s, he told me. And that was a thing that wasn't just used by us as cricket fans, but it was actually used by the teams themselves. And he really opened up cricket scorecards so we knew so much more about the game. And the thing is, imagine just doing that would be enough. But Travis then went on to work for Wisden for a little while. He then came back to Cricinfo before he ended up being the chief technical officer for CricViz. So think about the three places that Travis worked for just on their own: the original Bible, the new Bible, and then the company that has changed the way that cricket has been played. And Travis was integral to all of those places. But I just wanted to tell you a couple of quick stories about him because he should be more known in cricket. The first one is that Travis used to do a lot of ball-by-ball commentary. And he was doing the Australian Test match in India when Jason Gillespie and Steve Waugh collided. And that was where Steve Waugh broke his nose. So Travis decided to call him Big Nose for the rest of the game on the ball-by-ball commentary. The problem was that at that point, Cricinfo and Cricket Australia had a partnership with the website baggygreen.com.au, meaning it went up on the official website. And later, Cricinfo would be given a PDF from Cricket Australia highlighting every mention of Big Nose over and over again. And that was the beginning of the end of Travis's ball-by-ball career, and also the partnership between Cricket Australia and Cricinfo. Travis always lamented this, but mostly because he couldn't come up with a better joke than Big Nose, which really annoyed him. My other story about Travis was that, the whole world was sleeping on the TV show Breaking Bad. Travis was like the biggest fan of that show. I remember him sending me messages about it and everything else. And so much so that while most people in the world hadn't heard of the show, Travis went out and he bought himself the same hat, the Heisenberg hat. That became synonymous with the show. When Breaking Bad got big, he just continued to wear it, even though at that stage it wasn't the cool thing that he wanted. And that kind of tells you a lot about Travis. He was a man of sort of quiet but fierce passion. And when he liked something, he was kind of all in on it. And it is because he loved our game that he changed how it was talked about, what we knew about it, and then eventually how it was played on the field. Stats Guru had a huge impact, not to mention that later on with CricViz as well, he continued to actually change the way that people thought about cricket on the field and the way it was played. And Travis changed the game just because of how much he loved it and how much he wanted to know more about it. And sadly, he leaves us too soon. Thoughts go out to his family for having to, go on without him. But even though he's left us too soon, I really do think that his impact on our sport will hopefully be around for generations. So if you don't know who Travis Basevi is, please, there's a lot of great Twitter threads out there. Nan Vasu has written an article on him as well. I'm sure Cricinfo and CricViz will put up some other stuff as well. But, he's a different kind of cricket hero, but certainly one that affected a lot of the lives of the people who will probably be watching this video, but also kind of the game itself. Just going to go to some comments and I'll see what we have here. Oh, all right. Let's see what we have from the fans. All right. Kanan says, apart from the West Indies not making it, a lot of bad news. Namibia didn't qualify yesterday. Today it was Scotland. Two sides that actually proved themselves against better teams. I mean, I can understand this thought, and it's why I picked this question. I saw it before. But that is what qualifying is, right? Like Scotland had two chances. Namibia gave themselves the box position to be able to qualify. West Indies weren't playing better cricket than anyone else in that group. So yes, I can understand you thinking, well, those are three sides that played in the second round last time. I'm not sure though that Namibia is any better than Netherlands. In fact, I would disagree. I would say Netherlands is a better side. Scotland and the West Indies maybe have higher ceilings than Ireland and Zimbabwe. Neither of those teams are fully functioning at the moment, although, as I said, with Scotland, it really could have gone either way. But West Indies certainly isn't functioning the way it is. You earn it, right? These other teams earned it. Even if they lose in the next round, we see that. That's what happens in world events all the times. All right. A Carnival of Sorts says, given the likes of Little, Adair, Delaney, Tector, Camphor, and Tucker are all 26 young. I thought Camphor was older than that, but you might be right. He must be around 26 anyway. How do you see this Irish team developing the next decade? I think in the short term, I still worry a little bit about the strength of the top order. But yeah, I think I did a video about this a while back when it comes to Irish cricket. There's a lot of talent coming through in that next wave. Whether it's backed up by enough, what would you call them? Role players, support players, that sort of level of cricketer is probably the difference between Irish cricket being really good and not being really good. But, Tector, I mean, we haven't really seen him play much in this World Cup. He's fantastic. Little is still developing. I'm a big Mark Adair fan. Lorcan Tucker, I don't know where he fits in, but within the top 7 structure is really good. Curtis Camphor, if he keeps finding these levels within himself, he's going to be a fantastic player, isn't he? So, there's a part of me that goes, is he that good? And there's a part of me that goes, I don't care because he keeps performing. But there's a lot to like of a lot of these players. But I do wonder if they're going to have, you almost need a blend of players who come in who aren't particularly stars to be able to back up these players. And then what's the ceiling? I think the ceiling on Little's really high. I think the ceiling on Tector is really high. The other guys, maybe are just very, very, what's the best word of putting it? A very consistent place for Ireland, but maybe don't have high ceilings. But if they get a lot out of Little and Tector and everyone else plays their role, and then a couple of support players come in, they could be a really good team. I think that, there's a few other players who are obviously getting towards the end of their time as well. And they've already had mass retirements, haven't they? So it's a tricky period for Irish cricket. I worry much more about their batting than I think I do their bowling at the moment. I think there's a lot of good bowling options coming through. I think they'll be able to come up with 5 good bowling options. Their batting, I'm not as sure about. Group A is a three-way race. Afghanistan and Sri Lanka aren't going to do anything, and New Zealand have too many flaws. I mean, New Zealand always come into these tournaments with too many flaws. I think most people think that's the tougher group, just because there are three teams who look like they could obviously qualify. New Zealand, I think, it depends on this young wave of New Zealand batters. I suppose is the best way of putting it, because with Williamson and his elbow and Taylor not there, they really need that sort of Finn Allen, Glenn Phillips guys, Mark Chapman if he gets a game, to really stand up, and we haven't seen that enough. But I think that's a pretty tough group. Sri Lanka, I don't expect a lot from. Afghanistan can certainly spoil, though. No one. I don't think anyone's going to be surprised if they beat a good team in this particular group. So it looks pretty tough to me. Let's have a look here. Pakistan and South Africa with the biggest fight for qualification, says Anwesh. India will go through. I mean, again, it's the same thing. There are three good teams there. I don't think anyone would be. I mean, I think India is the current favorite for the tournament. I think that's partly because the bookies are favoring England and Australia in the odds. So it means that they're in their group, and there could be that group could be a bit trickier. But the bowling attacks that Pakistan and South Africa have could bother India as much as they could bother anyone. So you only need one good game. It's this is what this tournament is about. It's someone asked me a question yesterday of will the best team win this tournament, and I was like, no, that's not how World T20s happen. I mean, we've had the best teams win it on occasion. You'd probably argue the two West Indian titles was certainly that. I'm trying to think if there've been many more. I'm not sure they have. So from that perspective, there's no doubt that it's a tough competition. And get the wrong toss, you get the dew at the wrong time, you drop one catch. I mean, look at Scotland. What? 32 overs into that game against Ireland, they were in the next round. And over the next 50 overs of cricket, it just doesn't go their way. Are they a better team than Ireland or Zimbabwe? Perhaps. Well, they're going home. That's T20 cricket is like that, and you certainly get positions like that. So yeah. What else have we got here? Just seeing if there's any. Imran says the West Indies captain did something wrong by winning the toss and batting first. They're not making any runs. Look, on my Discord channel, someone said that they got the tactics all wrong and that the coach and captain have to go and they're a bit old-fashioned in their T20. That could be true. They didn't make enough runs in this tournament consistently. They didn't really look like they were a team that could put 160 on the board. And I've been talking about 160 a lot coming in. That's kind of the par score in Australian T20s. It's not going to be on every wicket, obviously. West Indies didn't look like they had the ability to score that. Even when they made runs against, was it the Zimbabwe game? It was messy. They never looked like a team that could make consistent runs to me. That's not tactics. I don't think that's coach. Perhaps if Shimron Hetmeyer, if was in that side, things would change. And Andre Russell would obviously make people think differently. But there seems to be a problem with finding players who can make consistent runs in the West Indies team. And I think not only is their top four the lowest average, I think they've had the lowest average everywhere. And there's a big difference between what they used to be, which is having players like Andre Russell and Sunil Narine be able to hit, and then having Marlon Samuels and Lendl Simmons and even Chris Gale batting long. They're not matching those things anymore. They don't have the guys who have the high averages, who can hit sixes, with the guys who with the high strike rates who don't stay in for a long time. And they just don't look as good a team to me. So I think they didn't lose. They're not out of this tournament because they didn't win the toss. They're out of this tournament because their batting never turned up. And in their case, quite literally, because Shimron Hetmai didn't get on the plane, did he? Just seeing what else we've got here. Lucky says, is this the first time West Indies are out of the qualifying round? Yeah, they were in the tournament last time, and they very nearly didn't qualify for the 2019 World Cup in that game against Scotland. So that would have been the first time, and they scraped home then. So, we talked about that in the video. Could actually be a very good thing for West Indies cricket. In fact, I didn't talk about it in the main part of the video, but I'm going to talk about this. When they were trying to reshape Test cricket to have a proper championship, the idea was going to be 7 teams and 7 teams. It wouldn't have been exactly that, obviously, because we didn't have 14 Test teams. But the basic idea was to have a couple of teams coming up to play first-class games in the second tier and then have a first tier. And the reason that we didn't have it is because teams like the West Indies and Sri Lanka said, whoa, wait a minute. Once we go to the second tier, no one will ever think about us ever again. That's what you want to happen, even if you are West Indies and Sri Lanka, because then there's no excuses. Then there's no being a permanent cellar dweller, right? The reason that promotion and relegation is such a brilliant concept is because it means you have earned your place at the top. Yes, we would have had to get used to divisions of Test cricket. Yes, there would have been confusing parts of all this, and there would have been, pitch issues and all sorts of rain issues and everything else. But on a very basic level, cricket should be about qualifying, and it hasn't been, right? And that's why, we have these stupid situations where Argentina is not a test-playing nation because despite the fact that they beat the MCC twice, they're not from the Commonwealth, and they're not promoted. New Zealand are, and India are, and West Indies are, right? If you just had it based on how good you were at cricket, Argentina would now be a major cricket nation, right? And they're not the only ones. You shouldn't just get a seat at the high table. So I hope that in the future that teams having to qualify will be a much better thing, and we won't get teams sort of, I suppose doing what Sri Lanka did from 2014 to 2021, of just going nowhere, of not making any good firm decisions, of not, of just changing captains and coaches, hoping that eventually you'll find the magic captain or coach that will do everything for you. So I know there are going to be a lot of people who've grown up with West Indies cricket, especially the older generation, and people of more of my age group, who are going to be sad that this has happened. But maybe this is what needs to happen. But anyway, there you go. There's a bit of a rant. Although I suppose most of my things are a bit of a rant. There's a lot of questions about the West Indies here. Harsha says, where's Harsha? Do you think the pitches at other venues will follow a similar behaviour to Geelong and Hobart? 150 to 160 games favouring bowlers. So Australia over the last couple of years has been a low batting average. I can't remember what it is, but it's 23, 24 over the T20 games. So a bit lower than, it might actually be lower than that, but it's lower than the average. I remember I did that. I haven't had a chance to put it up on any of the videos yet. And 150 to 160 has been around the par total, maybe 163, let's say, to be weirdly specific. All the grounds are different. I think we all know that. But as a general rule, right across the game, those things have held up within Australian cricket. And, there's going to be different things. We know the Gabba is traditionally a very fast-scoring game. We know that the MCG has its own quirks, and a few other grounds will as well. So, but it's not like England and India, which generally have really high-scoring T20 games. And so it's a little bit slower than those are, and it does seem to have more wickets than what you would see in an average league. So I would expect that to continue, but obviously every ground is different. Weather conditions are going to play a part as well, as is dew and all those sorts of things. Let's see what else we got here. Oh, this is a good one. Phil says, recommend looking at Zimbabwe pre and post Houghton. Drubbed by Afghanistan, beaten 3-2 by Namibia. So Phil's going through some of their losses. It's worth noting, though, that they did beat, was it Ireland or Scotland? I've now forgotten. Before Houghton. I think they were very much assembling some of their team at that point. There's no doubt they've been better under him, and I mentioned him in the video specifically. And there's no doubt that they've thought about their cricket differently at that time. But they also, I think, a few things have fallen into place. Like Sikandar Raza's form predates Houghton. Like he's become one of the better T20 players around. Was it the CricViz metric that he's got them, the best batting impact in international cricket or T20s? I can't remember. Over this year so far, that's not just under Houghton. But yes, it is definitely worth looking at that. And that's why we mentioned on the video that he's certainly, even though he's only become coach very late on, that he certainly played a part on that. A couple of super stickers. I don't know what super stickers are, but thank you, Load Runner. And thank you, Kudzai. Now, let's just have a look at what else here. Who's winning on the 23rd? India or Pakistan? Honestly, sorry. I haven't put you up here, Roshan. Honestly, mate, I haven't thought about it at all. I know it's a huge game for you, but I've been waking up at 5 a.m. UK time to cover all these other tournaments, trying to put together this new show. Obviously, a lot going on at 99.94. We've got a bunch of new podcasts coming through as well, one of which I'll mention in a moment. So I haven't had a look at that in great detail yet at all. My biggest worry is what we talked about on the show yesterday, which is that it might rain. Let's have a look. It's the same with Adil. I mean, these are good questions. I'm not saying they're not right, but I haven't even really thought about it. I think coming in, I thought Australia should be the favorite with India's injuries and England's injuries. So I still think that they're the favorite. I did notice that they slipped a lot in their odds, a lot, but they went from 3 to 1. 2.5 to 1, 3 to 1 to 4 to 1. I think on as a general consensus across the bookmakers. It did feel though that Australia wasn't taking the warm-ups particularly seriously, not in a bad way, but just in a experimental way. So I don't know if that should have played into the odds at all, but clearly it did for the bookmakers. Let's just see if there's anything else here. Well, this is a good one. Pranav, why are there no more top order opening frontline bowlers like Neil Johnson or Jarrod Callis? What are you talking about, man? Kyle Mayers, Pranav. Kyle Mayers has just done it. I mean, Neil Johnson, that's more, Zimbabwe were at a lower level, although they did have a very good team in that World Cup, to be fair. And he only did it briefly for them. It was probably in a period where we probably put more those sorts of power hitters up the order, whereas now your power hitters are probably going to bat further down. And Callis is one of the greatest players of all time. There aren't many of those around. Just a couple more, see what else we've got here. Yeah, just on Zimbabwe from Dimitri here. Look, I'm not expecting Zimbabwe to have a massively successful tournament from here on in, although this is a massively successful tournament for them. They've got a really good bowling attack. I do think they have a couple of senior batters, and we know, I forget his name, is it Dion Mayers, who they had high hopes on as a batter. I don't know if he's given up cricket, but he certainly has left Zimbabwe and moved to the UK. I think he's studying at university. I think that's right. And they need to be able to continue to produce a few younger batters coming through like him. But the seam bowling, I really like. Spin bowling, in fact, over the last few years, maybe even going back to Strang, they've always sort of had, a good spin option available to them. So there's something there. I don't know enough about that next generation of Mayers. I think it's Mayers, isn't it? Other than Mayers, to know of who else is coming through next. But me and Bharat talked about their bowling, their seam bowling on Uncovered. We think that they're really, really quite good. And they can certainly do some damage there. What else we got here? This is interesting. Leon. Oh no, it's not, because I didn't press it. Sorry, Leon. Will Raza get picked in the IPL auction next month? I think the reason that he hasn't got to go so far is because he bowls off spin. I think if he bowled left arm finger spin, I think he might have got to go. But because he bowls off spin, he hasn't got to go. He's changed his bowling of recent times, and he started bowling the knuckleball, and he started bowling like the sun on the rain. He's no longer a traditional off spinner. So I wonder that on top of his batting is better than. I've seen him bat this good before, but never this consistently good. So his batting has certainly raised a level there. So I think from that perspective, he's a very good chance. But you'd have to have a look at the rosters and what teams need, because it's not just a case of if someone is playing good, then we look at that. I think though, because he can bat 4 and 5, and he can be a frontline bowler. Sorry, not frontline bowler. That's wrong. Because he can bat 4 and 5, and he can give you between 2 and 3 overs a game, and he's shown his power a little bit more. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets a go. I don't think he's that far away. And we saw, obviously, we've seen this before. Players do well in World Cups, and they quite often get a bump, not just in the IPL, but in auctions around the world. So I don't think that is massively going to change. Last one. Ashoka says, who's going to score the most runs and the most wickets? If I remember correctly, from the last tournament, it was the teams who actually had played in the qualifiers who do really well. And so the ICC, even though they know, I mean, they've invented this stupid format, that it was a bit silly, they kept having put up like the most runs and the most wickets on the screen, despite the fact it was like, Scottish and Sri Lankan, and I'm trying to think whoever else went through to that level, right? So they'll be the players who probably end up with the most runs and the most wickets. It's a little bit silly from that. So just thank you to everyone who did the questions. They've given me access to actually taking the questions now, so I can click them myself. So I can do a few more on each show, hopefully. Also, I won't have to get up at 5 a.m. For as often, so I'll probably feel more comfortable to stick around and chat. I just want to say one last thing. We have big news on 99.94 front. We actually have a bunch of new podcasts starting very soon, but we have one big name player who's going to come across with their own show. We have a new player entering the game, if you will. So tomorrow, I think after the World Cup mood board here, we're going to show you who that is. And I can't tell you much at the moment, but I will say this: the person is known for being very fast. There you go. So take that for what that could mean, almost anything. But take that for what you will, and we'll announce that new podcast tomorrow on this show. But thanks again. Keep getting your questions in. Share, like, subscribe, tap the icons, all these things. It all helps us. We're building this show. We know the first part of the tournament, not all the cricket fans are getting up for, but for us, it's we love this side of it. And from myself, Charlie, and Muku, thanks for all the tweets and support that we've had on the show so far. But for now, I'll see you tomorrow after the first games of the new round. And it'll be a later show as well. See you then.